They called it the, quote, Prick 25, but there was nothing funny about carrying one. The PRC-25 radio was the lifeline of every American platoon in Vietnam, the only way to call in artillery, airstrikes, or a medevac when things went bad. But for the man carrying it, the radio telephone operator, or RTO, it was almost a death sentence. The bulky pack weighed over 30 pounds with batteries, and it might as well have been a neon sign in the jungle. To the Viet Cong and North Vietnamese, that long wire sticking up meant one thing: kill him first. If you cut off the radio, you cut off the unit's hope of survival. That's why radio operators had some of the shortest life expectancies in the war. The radio operator was the nerve line of the entire platoon. In Vietnam, US forces relied on overwhelming firepower, artillery batteries, helicopter gunships, and jet strikes to even the odds against an enemy that knew the terrain far better. None of that mattered if you couldn't talk to higher command. That's where the RTO came in. By the mid-1960s, the US fielded the AN/PRC-25, the first truly portable VHF radio rugged enough for combat. It replaced the older tube-based models that were bulky, unreliable, and prone to frying themselves in the humidity. Suddenly, a single man could carry the power to summon an airstrike or a medevac right there on his back. But that responsibility was a curse as much as a lifeline. In the eyes of the enemy, he was a priority target. The AN/PRC-25 was advertised as, quote, man-pack portable, but ask any radio operator in Vietnam and they'd laugh at that phrase. The set weighed just under 25 pounds, but with 2 or 3 spare BA-43-86 batteries, it pushed past 30. Strapped into a rucksack frame, it dug into shoulders already rubbed raw by sweat and gear. And unlike a rifle or helmet, you couldn't ditch it in a hurry. Losing the radio meant cutting off the platoon's lifeline. Then there was the antenna. A 9-foot whip waved above the jungle canopy like a flag saying, quote, shoot here. Some RTOs bent it down with tape or cut it short to avoid drawing fire, but range always suffered. Add the radio to a full combat load, rifle, ammo, grenades, water, and an operator might stagger under 80 or 90 pounds in triple-digit heat. For many, it felt less like a lifeline and more like a target strapped to their back. Every enemy soldier in Vietnam knew the silhouette of a radio antenna. Viet Cong and North Vietnamese army units were trained to take out officers and RTOs first. Kill the lieutenant and his radio man, and you cut off artillery, medevac, leadership, and air support in one strike. That made the RTO one of the most valuable and most vulnerable men in the field. Snipers looked for the thin black rod bobbing over the grass. Machine gunners pounded the spot where the whip swayed. Even a quick burst of AK fire aimed at the antenna could shred the set or the man wearing it. To make matters worse, the RTO usually stayed glued to the platoon leader, another obvious target. Veterans often joked grimly that being an officer or a radio operator was like walking through the jungle with a glowing neon sign above your head. The enemy knew exactly who to hit first, and they rarely missed. Another thing, carrying the radio didn't exempt you from combat, it made everything harder. An RTO was expected to fight like any other rifleman, all while juggling the task of keeping his platoon connected to higher command. In the middle of an ambush, he might be crouched in the mud, fumbling with frequency knobs, shouting call signs into the handset as bullets cracked overhead. Calling in artillery or an airstrike wasn't as simple as pressing a button. It meant reading off grid coordinates, authenticating codes, and keeping your head clear while chaos erupted around you. Radios had a cruel habit of failing at the worst moments. A drained battery or loose connection could mean silence when the platoon needed fire support most. Operators carried spare batteries, but swapping one out while pinned down was no easy task. Snipers learned to watch for the RTO crouching lower than the rest of the squad, head bent into his handset. And yet the job carried an enormous weight of trust. Lose the radio, and men bled out waiting for a medevac that never came. Hold the line, and you could bring in artillery or gunships that turned certain death into survival. For the radio man, every firefight was a test of nerves, with his platoon's fate hanging on the cord dangling from his hand. In the crucible of the Vietnamese jungle, radio operators were literally shouldering the lifeline of their entire unit, and often that lifeline snapped too soon. Consider the grim statistic offered by multiple veterans and documented reports. The average life expectancy of a radio operator in firefights was estimated at 5 seconds. One voice that echoes this stark reality is that of Iowa radio operator Paul Dwyer. He recalled being briefed at communication school with words chalked on the board. Quote, "That number up on the board is your life expectancy in a firefight in seconds." There's also a haunting personal account collected by KGNU, where a soldier's sister recounted in vivid detail the brutal danger her brother faced as an RTO. She ended her tribute with chilling accuracy. Quote, "That's considered a very dangerous position. The average lifespan of an RTO is estimated at 5 seconds. A specific combat incident brings the horror into sharp focus. During the Battle of Ong Tan on October 17, 1967, a claymore mine detonated in the command element of Company A of the 2nd Battalion, 28th Infantry. The company's radio operator was killed instantly, along with key leadership figures, crippling communications and leaving the platoon effectively blind. These aren't abstract numbers, they're bullet-riddled memories, fractured radios, and the real devastating human cost of being the platoon's voice under fire. For the Americans, the radio was both their greatest strength and their Achilles heel. Firepower in Vietnam wasn't just rifles and grenades, it was artillery batteries waiting miles away, or a pair of Phantom jets overhead, all linked by one man with a handset. That dependence turned the RTO into the single most important soldier in the field. The North Vietnamese and Viet Cong fought differently. They relied on couriers, runners, and rugged field telephones strung through the jungle. Their chain of communication was slower but harder to cripple. Killing one messenger didn't silence the entire battalion. For the Americans, one bullet through an antenna could do just that. The irony is sharp. US technological superiority, the ability to rain down firepower with a single call, was pinned to the back of a 19-year-old kid with a giant radio strapped on. Just as flamethrower men on Iwo Jima and Panzer IV crews on the Eastern Front carried weapons that made them indispensable but doomed, the RTO was the Vietnam equivalent, essential to the fight, but fated to draw fire first. Radio operators weren't blind to their odds. They knew the whip antenna made them targets, so many tried to improvise. Some bent the antenna sideways with tape, weaving it through their pack straps so it hugged close to the body. Others cut it short, sacrificing range for survival. A few even used flexible, quote, tape antennas, which could be strung along the ground to avoid broadcasting their position. Camouflage was another trick. Operators wrapped their gear in burlap or foliage, hoping to break up the silhouette. But no matter what they tried, the weight and bulk of the PRC-25 couldn't be hidden. Veterans recalled how platoon mates instinctively clustered around their RTO, not just out of loyalty, but because everyone knew their lives depended on him. Protecting the radio man was protecting the only lifeline out of the kill zone. Most radio operators in Vietnam were barely out of high school, 19 or 20 years old, carrying the weight of a platoon's survival on their shoulders. Many never made it past their first firefight, yet countless citations for valor mention RTOs refusing to abandon their radios, calling in fire support until the moment they were cut down. Technology has shrunk since then. Today's radios fit in the palm of your hand. But in the jungles of Vietnam, the PRC-25 was a heavy, humming death sentence. Every patrol photo tells the same story. Look for the long antenna rising above the rest. That man was the platoon's voice, its hope, and far too often, its first casualty. When you see those pictures, remember the unseen burden he carried. If you found this story eye-opening, hit subscribe, leave a like, and don't miss our next video where we dive into more hidden truths of warfare.